I stood there, frozen in shock. I wasn't even supposed to be in the village that day, but something had pulled me back, a strange pull I couldn't explain, and there I was, right in front of the house where Obinna's big launch party was happening. Only it wasn't just a launch anymore. The crowd had gathered, but it wasn't for his celebration. 7 women, each with a baby girl in their arms, blocked the entrance, refusing to move until they spoke to Obinna. People whispered, exchanged looks. "What's going on?" they asked. But I knew, we all knew, and the truth was about to blow up in his face. His wife, Nkechi, watched from the doorway, her face stone cold. Obinna had no idea the storm was coming. Obinna had it all, or so it seemed. A beautiful wife, 3 daughters, and a booming business, mostly thanks to Nkechi's family connections. But for Obinna, it wasn't enough. He craved a son. His friends mocked him endlessly about not having a boy to carry on his name, and over time, that desire turned into desperation. I remember overhearing Obinna at the village bar, drunk and bragging about how he would do whatever it takes to have a son. At the time, we thought he was just venting, but then he started disappearing, going to town more often, and rumors began to swirl. They said he'd been seeing multiple women, all for one purpose, to give him a son. And now, standing here, looking at the faces of those women, each carrying his daughter, it all made sense. The 7 women were a sight to behold. They weren't shy, and they weren't quiet. Each of them had been lured in by Obinna's charm and promises, thinking they alone would be the one to finally give him a son. Instead, each one held a little girl who was the spitting image of him, and none of them was willing to stay hidden any longer. One by one, they spoke up, voices carrying across the courtyard. "He promised me a family," the first woman said. "He told me he would be there for me, that we would raise our child together." The others nodded, sharing similar stories of lies and broken promises. Obinna tried to quiet them, but they wouldn't stop. And that was when Nkechi, his wife, took a step forward. "Is this true, Obinna?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes cold. Obinna stammered, looking around desperately for an escape. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, burning through his skin. His wife, Nkechi, stood there, arms folded, her face an unreadable mask. She was known in the village for her grace and calm, but right then she looked like a storm ready to break. "Yes, Obinna, tell us," Nkechi pressed, her voice low. "Is it true?" Obinna's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence was louder than any answer he could give, and finally, the truth lay bare for everyone to see. 7 women, 7 daughters, and a web of lies that he'd spun just to chase a son he never got. The village chief, who'd come to bless Obinna's business launch, stepped forward, shaking his head. "You have dishonored your family, Obinna," he said, his voice grave. "You have lied, cheated, and disgraced your wife. What kind of man does this to his own blood?" And Nkechi's gaze was fixed on her husband, a mix of betrayal and disappointment in her eyes. "You think a son is all that makes a man proud?" she asked quietly, her words cutting through the crowd's murmurs. "You already had a family, 3 beautiful daughters. You threw it all away for this?" She gestured to the women, each holding a child who would never know their father's love. Obinna tried to protest, but Nkechi held up her hand. "Enough, Obinna. I gave you everything, my loyalty, my love, and my family's support to build this business, and you repay me with deceit?" Obinna swallowed hard, looking down, too ashamed to meet her gaze. Nkechi took a deep breath, then looked to the women who'd been dragged into this mess. You may have been misled, she told them, but you and your daughters are innocent in this. It's Obinna who must bear the shame alone. With a firm tone, Nkechi continued, I will be leaving with my daughters. And Obinna, I'll be taking everything my family invested in you and this business. The crowd gasped, and Obinna's face went pale. It was well known that his success was built on Nkechi's family's wealth and connections. Without them, he was nothing. The 7 women exchanged glances, each of them realizing that Obinna was far less powerful than he'd pretended to be. Some of them looked smug, others furious, but none of them seemed willing to stay quiet anymore. Obinna, the proud man who thought he could fool everyone, was being brought down right in front of the entire village. One by one, the villagers turned their backs on him, leaving Obinna standing alone in the courtyard, stripped of everything he'd built. He reached out to Nkechi, but she pulled back, her eyes hard. Goodbye, Obinna, she said, leading her daughters away from the life they once knew. In the days that followed, Obinna's life crumbled around him. Word spread quickly through the neighboring villages, and soon no one wanted to do business with him. Nkechi's family made sure that every contract, every connection, and every opportunity he had was severed. His business, once thriving, was left in ruins. Obinna tried to reach out to the 7 women, hoping they might help him, but each of them turned him away, disgusted by his lies and betrayal. Some even laughed in his face, pointing out that he had brought this fate upon himself. They didn't need him anymore. They had their daughters to focus on, and they weren't going to waste another second on a man who valued them so little. Now penniless and shunned, Obinna roamed the village, a shadow of the proud man he once was. People whispered as he passed, children pointed, and men shook their heads in disdain. It was a harsh punishment, but in the eyes of the villagers, it was justice. Obinna soon realized that he had nothing left. No family, no money, no respect. The sting of his friends' taunts about not having a son was nothing compared to the ridicule he now faced. Every corner of the village reminded him of his betrayal, and each passing day felt like a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. For the first time, Obinna was forced to confront the emptiness within him. He'd spent so many years chasing a dream, fueled by pride and ego, blind to the blessings he already had. The thought haunted him. He could have had a beautiful family with his wife and daughters, a legacy of love and respect, but instead he had thrown it all away. Obinna's story became a lesson in the village, a warning to those who thought they could play with the hearts of others without consequence. The elders used his tale to remind the young men of the dangers of pride and greed. Desperation led Obinna to a path he'd never considered before, seeking forgiveness. He had heard the whispers, the stories told by the elders to warn others, and he could barely stand the shame. One morning he went to Nkechi's family compound, kneeling at the entrance, hoping for a chance to speak to her. Nkechi's brothers met him at the gate, arms crossed and expressions hard. They didn't want to hear anything from him, but after hours of begging, Nkechi finally appeared. She looked at him with an emotion he hadn't seen before, not anger, but pity. What do you want, Obinna? She asked, her voice cool and detached. Obinna stammered, unable to meet her gaze. I am sorry, Nkechi. I know I betrayed you, our daughters, and everything we built together. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just needed you to know how sorry I am." Nkechi didn't respond, only gave him one last look before turning her back, leaving him kneeling in the dust. One of the 7 women, Adaku, held deep resentment toward Obinna, the man who had betrayed her trust. She found it hard to forgive and reminded her daughter daily of the importance of self-respect and independence. Her bitterness was a stark reminder to the village of the hurt Obinna had caused. Surprisingly, a few villagers who admired his hard work began offering Obinna small jobs. They respected his willingness to work humbly and slowly began to trust him with their fields. This newfound support encouraged him to keep striving, even though he remained isolated and alone. The daughters, now teenagers, grew closer. They often visited each other's homes, studying and playing together. Although they didn't know their shared connection, they felt an inexplicable bond, a sisterhood that brought them joy and comfort. The mothers met again, this time to discuss their daughters' futures. Each of them agreed that the girls deserved to know the truth someday, but couldn't decide how or when to reveal it. They feared that learning about Obinna would damage their daughter's sense of identity. After hearing about his hard work, Nkechi decided to visit Obinna. She watched from a distance as he worked in the fields, barely recognizable from the man she once knew. When their eyes met, she felt a mixture of anger, pity, and something she couldn't quite name. She left without speaking to him. The village chief called Obinna to discuss his actions and his recent changes. In their conversation, the chief acknowledged Obinna's efforts to rebuild himself, but warned that he could never undo the hurt he caused. This conversation planted a seed of purpose in Obinna's heart, one that would guide his next steps. Obinna began volunteering at the village school, helping the teachers with repairs and cleanup. This act of service was his attempt to give back to the community that he had once abandoned in his quest for wealth and prestige. One evening, the mothers decided it was time to tell their daughters about Obinna. Gathering them together, they shared the painful story of betrayal, explaining that they all shared the same father. The daughters were shocked, angry, and saddened, unsure how to process the revelation. The daughters confronted Obinna, seeking answers to why he had abandoned them. Obinna was deeply ashamed but told them the truth, confessing his mistakes and selfishness. He begged for their forgiveness, though he knew he might never earn it. With the truth of Obinna's history now public, the village was divided. Some respected his efforts to change, while others continued to scorn him. Obinna accepted their judgment, knowing that he had earned it through his past actions. The mothers decided to move forward, letting go of past pain to embrace new beginnings. They supported each other in raising their daughters, building a tight-knit community of strong women who encouraged each other to thrive. The daughters, inspired by their mothers, began to embrace their shared story. They excelled in their studies, determined to make their mothers proud. Each of them had inherited their mother's resilience and carried a sense of independence that they were determined to pass down to future generations. Years later, Obinna, now an elderly man, looked back on his life with a mix of regret and gratitude. Though he had lost everything, he had found peace in his repentance. His daughters grew into remarkable women, each carrying the strength of their mothers and the lessons of their father's mistakes. In the end, Obinna's story became a tale of caution and redemption, a legacy that reminded the village of the power of humility, forgiveness, and the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for tuning in to Tales Motherland again. We sincerely appreciate your viewership and likes and comments. Please be sure to hit the subscribe and like button and stay connected to us for new intriguing African stories and folktale. Once again, thanks for watching.